Kia ora and welcome to this episode. I'm really thrilled to be talking to two really important people in this space. The first is the Minister for Women, the Honourable Nicola Grigg, but we're just going to call her Nicola.
Thank
And
you.
Teresa Lee from YWCA and some of the amazing mahi that she's been doing. And yeah, so we're going to start with introductions. So why don't we start with you? We'll go alphabetical. Nicola, we'll start with you. If you can introduce, who you are, what you do, and why you're involved in this.
Okay, great. Nicola Grigg. I am the Minister for Women. I've been a Member of Parliament since 2020, and I've been the Minister for Women since 2023. I'm absolutely loving this role, absolutely fascinated by the shifts that we can make at a policy level that have a really real material difference for women across the country. And so I've got my key priorities are absolutely around advancing women's economic empowerment, their individual wealth through driving them into higher paying jobs, driving down that gender pay gap, driving down the retirement savings gap. And there's multiple little prongs that we can use to do that, to achieve that. Some of them are around reducing impacts of online harm. Others are around clearer guidance for access to healthcare, because healthy women can participate in the economy. So the work stream for me is very wide ranging, but it's all targeting driving at women's improved wealth and outcomes.
Awesome, amazing. Okay, kia ora, Teresa. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, kia ora, Nicola and Craig, and everyone listening. I'm Teresa, and I'm part of the team at the YWCA Tamaki Makaurau, or the Y. We're an 140-year-old charity with a vision of a gender equitable Aotearoa, and our work is all about amplifying the leadership and voices of young women and gender diverse youth. We run the Y25 Youth Leadership Program that recognizes 25 incredible trailblazers every year, the Gender at Work community and Gender Tick accreditation for workplaces, and also the Pay Gap Insights Hub, where over 140 organizations voluntarily report their gender pay gap. And exactly 1 year ago, the Y worked with the Ministry for Women to survey over 1,300 women across Aotearoa about their experiences of talking about pay at work. And it was so awesome to see so much interest in the topic. And we're so grateful to have heard from so many people. So thank you so much for inviting me to this podcast today. And I'm really excited to chat about a topic I'm very passionate about and share some of the things we've heard and learned.
Thanks very much, Teresa. And I want to say one thing, just because we have an international um, reach for Two Hands as well. We've been involved with other organisations. Right? This is not a New Zealand issue just by itself either. So, there are things we can learn, but also things that we can teach others. And while Two Hands is specifically a tech association, we know that while we've got specific issues in tech, they are indicative of the wider pay gap discussions as well. So we're not just going to limit ourselves to technology today, because those issues are quite similar across the board. And so I want to start with just where do we start with this employment pay gap? And where does it start in a person's career? Maybe, Nicola, we'll go to you first. With your perspective and where you've seen and what you've seen, where in the stage of employment does the gap start?
A really good question. And as the old saying goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. So you start with measuring your pay gap. And that's probably, if I look back on my time in this role, that would probably be my proudest achievement as the Minister for Women, is we've actually launched the first ever government-backed gender pay gap calculator. So for anyone interested, you can jump on the Ministry for Women's website. You need to have a baseline of around 10 men and 10 women. So it's not for your small, self-charge, sole charge type businesses. But that was the advice we got given as the best place to start. It works on total REM, and you can punch in all your numbers, spits out what your gender pay gap is, and then I think the most powerful part about the toolkit is it actually will download customizable. I don't even know if that's a word. Custom designed action plans, which I think is as I say, the most powerful part about it, because it actually, for those who, just venturing into this space for the first time, gives you a benchmark, gives you an opportunity to start to tackle this thing head on. And, it's a brave decision to tackle it head on, because a lot of businesses, I don't think, are calculating their pay gap because they're probably a bit daunted by it. They're probably a bit daunted by what it might mean. Will it cause reputational harm or damage? The answer to that is no. The bravest, most important part is leaning in, making that calculation, and then you can work from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, two ends. It doesn't work for us because we've only got one employee and our pay gap is 100%. So yeah, my
And a
staff,
male-dominated workforce.
yeah, my team are outsourced, so they're 100% women, so we're okay there. But Teresa, we're going to come back to the survey specifically in a moment. But have you got any general thoughts around, you work with women and young women, where in the employment life cycle does the pay gap start, and does it get any better on the way through?
Yeah. Well, nationally, the most recent measurement is the pay gap for all women is 5.2%, and it is significantly higher for Pacifica women at 16%, Wahine Māori 12%, and Asian women 10%. And we know that the pay gap is smallest at the beginning of young people's careers, but then it widens significantly when women are between 30 and 44 years old, and eventually contributes to a massive 37% retirement gap when people are 56 to 65 years old. And we know a lot of factors contribute to this gap, such as unequal parent and caregiving responsibilities at home, a lack of support or structures for women progressing into leadership, and bias and discrimination that unfortunately still exists. And it's ultimately not about blame, it's about understanding and changing those societal beliefs and attitudes about gender that we all learn from a really young age, role modeled in our homes, to our communities, to workplaces, to our media and our leaders. And, despite pay gaps being massive for ethnic women and underrepresentation across leadership in every industry, 46% of New Zealanders actually think that gender equality has been achieved. And those are the types of attitudes that inform and hold up work systems that continuously create inequities like pay gaps. And we have a choice to change that and change these attitudes that deeply affect young people today. Some of the young women we talked to, they shared that they didn't want to share that they wanted to have a family because they were scared of the consequences on their career. Or some of them shared with us that they're the only one who kind of looks like them in their team or in their workplace or even their industry or a classroom of 100 people. So closing pay gaps and ensuring Aotearoa as a country where we have truly equitable employment opportunities is super urgent, and it requires really long-term systemic change and collaboration, as well as those changes to mindset and behavior. And I really believe that if we work together to change this for the future generations, which is completely possible, it only makes New Zealand a fairer and better place for everyone where no one gets left behind.
Yeah. Teresa, I think you make a great point around, people feeling like they're the only one in the room that looks like them, for example. We did some work with a panel of students from Pukekohe High School last year, and we thought that the reason why they wouldn't want to come and work in this particular industry that we work in was because they didn't see it as cool or fun. But in actual fact, what it was they thought they would be unsafe in their workplace. And that people would look down on them, and that they wouldn't see people or be with people like themselves. This year we're doing the panel again with 10 students, but we're just doing it with our wahine because we wanted to know, what specific issues apply with women. I want to delve a bit more into the survey itself that you undertook. So can you give us, what were the insights that you picked up on the way through as you did the survey? And then we'll come back to Nicola around, the things that they picked up at the ministry level and think that they can work through. So how about hearing from you first around, those sorts of things that you picked up?
Yeah, as I said, over 1,300 respondents took part and shared their experiences and perspectives, and only 4% felt very confident asking for a pay rise or negotiating pay, which is incredibly low. Almost one third had never asked for a pay rise or negotiated their pay despite wanting to. And, that was particularly in situations like a meeting with their manager or in a performance or REM review meeting or in an interview. And almost half of the respondents said they didn't feel appropriately involved in decisions about their pay, with 40% saying that they didn't think they had enough information about how pay is determined at their workplace. And so some of the common barriers that young women brought up to discussing pay were things like stigma and taboo, a culture of pay secrecy in New Zealand, precarious and insecure contract work, a lack of pay transparency in workplaces, and also, really importantly, fear of negative consequences, and also feeling undervalued. A lot of them actually talked about how they grew up with beliefs about how you should just be grateful to even have a job or to be paid, or that talking about pay is inappropriate or it's private or it's rude. And sometimes there are cultural factors that also contribute to that. And they also often believed it was risky to talk about pay, and it definitely can be. So I really acknowledge that. And a lot of them were also super aware that there are gender norms and bias and discrimination. And like you said, Craig, that feeling of feeling unsafe or like the only one. And a lot of them hadn't had a lot of exposure to pay discussions. So maybe their parents didn't talk about it or their friends don't talk about it. So I think the main takeaway is that there's a massive opportunity to provide young people, but also all staff, with clear information, with guidance, supportive spaces to start these conversations. And, everyone can play a part in having these open, more confident discussions.
Look, I don't think we should be surprised at some of this stuff that comes out, because many of us that are, and I'm getting old now, but we've been through careers, and we know the general saying where when women go for a job, they apply for a job where they can do 90% of the job.
Yeah.
Men go for those where they can do 50% of the job. Now, I know that's a generalization and I don't like it, but still there is something in that somehow. So what were the things that you then at the ministry and as the minister picked up from the survey and took through into a guide, and the things that you felt were really important to do something about, Nicola?
Yeah. Teresa, when you were speaking, I was nodding so hard my head was going to fall off. But I was that person that you are talking about. I've never in my life asked for a pay rise. I've never in my life asked what my male counterparts were being paid. I started out life as a journalist before, going through a range of other things before ending up being a member of parliament. But I was that person. And I'm shocked at myself. And if I could go back and give my 20-year-old self an uppercut, I would. But you're right, it is a societal shift. And Craig, your question around what can government do, we have a responsibility as leaders to step up and to challenge norms and societal expectations, and to I suppose I don't want to be so arrogant as to say give people the right to ask, but encourage them to ask, because that's why we've made this pay gap calculator available. That's why we have changed the law. It was a members' bill that Camilla Bellich from the Labour Party had pulled. I worked really closely with Camilla. I got our party to support it. It's now passed into law to get rid of secrecy clauses, to encourage pay transparency. By doing those sorts of things, I hope that we as politicians can show to young women and to emerging and aspirational leaders that it is now normal to be able to ask what colleagues are being paid at the point of interview. Ask your potential employer, do you measure your pay gap? If not, why not? Do you publish your pay gap? If so, where? If not, why not? I'm sure you've got an annual report you could put it in, if not a public database that Teresa talked to earlier. So there's all sorts of things that we can do in terms of leading by example. But it is a societal shift. And as much as I go around and speak to employers and industry organisations, equally, I'm really trying to tap into that young younger audience of students and young professionals to encourage them, to give them the confidence to make that ask, to back themselves, to be demanding, because you can sure as eggs bet that your male counterparts will be doing that. And it saddens me that women don't necessarily, and I really hope that with the transition of time, it becomes a norm.
Yeah, I think the point is it should be a safe place to be able to ask these questions. I mean, those of us that have been in corporate life, sometimes you can think it's solved because there are pay ranges or there are steps, and everyone knows that this is a step 3 job, but there are always ranges in those things. And so it's, what you're negotiating within that. And it's too hard if you don't ask the question about where are my colleagues at, because you don't know where to pitch it. So I think that's really important, and being strong enough to do that.
And what I would say as well is I don't want any listeners or viewers to come away thinking that all employers are bad, because they're not. And often and increasingly, I'm seeing employers with the best intentions of the world who are really alive to this conversation, and they're really active and engaged and wanting to improve, because they know that, dare I say it without being ageist, that perhaps, Teresa, your generation as opposed to mine or Craig's, you are highly articulate and educated and ambitious and all those things. And as a generation are probably more demanding than we were about what your employer can do for you. And so, a savvy employer's got to think about that. They've got to provide the kind of workspace that this generation and younger want to move into and bring their unique skill sets and their talent to. And if you are an old dinosaur and you are refusing to engage in this stuff, then you're going to fall by the wayside, because you're not going to be attracting this top talent that you need to be attracting.
Let's just talk about senior leadership for a moment. So certainly in technology, we have an issue around women representation at leadership space. And there's a lot of work that's being done in that space, but still when you start to look at it, the attention that's given to it, and I would hesitate, well, maybe not even hesitate, to say if you asked a large corporate's HR team what the gender pay gap is, they probably can't tell you. Half of them probably are surprised they haven't even looked at it, but which is why it's so important. But, what can we do to encourage women who are, I'm going to come back to starting, so let's not talk about establishing career, but at that leadership level, I mean, what would you be saying to senior leader people who want to get into governance, etc., around this? And maybe we'll start with Nicola, because maybe you're a little bit closer to that generation than Teresa is. You're way younger than me, but you go for it.
Yeah, again, really pertinent. I actually I spoke to an Institute of Directors and Ministry for Women event last night on exactly this issue, and the advice from the Institute of Directors is if you are sitting at that governance table, you need to be forward thinking about your succession planning, and you don't necessarily look to your C-suite. You look to your second and third tiers below that, and you look and you identify the talent, you actively manage it, and you bring it through. Then that sentiment directly contradicts the next thing I'm about to say is a lot of those big corporates are finding it really hard to get women into that C-suite level, not so much at the directorship level, because of the demands and the scrutiny of the role and the hours involved, oftentimes because of the childcare issue. And, I'm a mum of a 2-year-old, and let me tell you, trying to be a minister of the Crown and a mum of a 2-year-old is a thing. It's a big, big juggle. And, I'm not the first and I won't be the last to do it, so I'm not pretending I'm special at all. But motherhood, and hence the retirement savings gap, motherhood and the motherhood penalty really impacts women's opportunities to get into those senior management roles. And Teresa, you touched on it earlier, there probably is an unconscious bias out there, for people recruiting into those leadership roles. They look at a woman, they think, oh, she's a mum, or she might not be available, all those things. And that again is something we really have to push back on. But coming back to a really strong leadership team, and what I would say, I pushed really hard on NZX representatives last night, because they're sitting at about 40% women's representation at board level, governance level. And equally, we've got a self-imposed target here in government that we have a 50-50 equity split of men and women across Crown entities. So that's about 2,000 appointments. But and again, we can lead by example, but I think there is an organic uptake occurring out in the private sector and those big corps you're talking about. Teresa, you talked about the 140 that are registered already publishing their pay gap. And there's calls about making it compulsory, but actually, since we've launched this pay gap toolkit, we've had 60,000 hits on that in a year and a half. So I think there is a drive that's occurring out there. I think it is an expectation. Savvy boards, savvy directors are going to know that they need to be feeding that pipeline through, that they need to be coaching talent along. Otherwise, they're going to be the poorer for it.
Yeah. Teresa, coming to you, what about women who are establishing their career or getting into the workforce? What are some of the tips you've got for them, or some of the learnings you had from the survey, particularly at that level? And I'm quite interested because we have a Future Leaders program, and actually the most active gender, if I can say it that way, in that leadership program are young women. They are really taking the lead and wanting to be in that space, but they are coming up against barriers. So what did you learn, Teresa?
Yeah, in the survey, a lot of women shared how important it was to learn to advocate for themselves and be really assertive about their worth. And firstly, I think that comes down to knowing and leading yourself first, reflecting on what's important to you and your future, asking yourself, what are my goals? Am I playing it safe somewhere? Is there something I've been avoiding that could help me grow? And at the same time, of course, it's super okay to be confused or a little uncertain, because when you're young, your 20s, they're like a training ground and nobody has it all figured out. And unexpected opportunities will show up if you stay true to your values and your purpose. I think, secondly, build relationships and lean on a support network. This could be your managers, it could be your colleagues, a mentor, a sponsor, and very importantly, often friends and whānau. Ask them for their help, whether that's to brainstorm or practice having a pay conversation. Be coachable, regularly ask for open and honest feedback. And even though connecting with other people might not always change what happens and what you're up against, it will help remind you of your worth and your why. And when it comes to pay conversations specifically, the tips I have, some of them are not that innovative, but do your research on the organization and market rates. Practice articulating your impact, your contributions, your potential, and find opportune moments to highlight what you've contributed and discuss progression, such as in an interview or a meeting with your manager. You could say, I'm actually really keen to grow and progress. So, what would be helpful to know and do to help me get there? And I guess also, if things don't work out or they are very challenging, that will show you who you really are and build your resilience and teach you lessons that will keep you moving forward. We definitely can't always choose what happens, but we can accept what's in our control and focus on that and not give up if we come up against resistance. We have to be, like I heard recently, like an unkillable cockroach. No one else is like you and no one is better than you. And it's really important not to limit ourselves based on others' limited ability to see and understand us. And I think my final message is that New Zealanders are really well known for being friendly, being very chill, being very humble. But if we don't talk about ourselves, then who's going to do that for us? I think you need to be proud of what you're doing, and that pride and enthusiasm will rub off. If you can be the person who says hi to everybody in the office, even though nobody else does.
Talking about being able to talk about yourself, let's go back to the politician. Nicola, what would be, just following on from that, what would be one or two of the things that you would tell your younger self when you were starting the career? You mentioned it earlier, you wished you'd done things differently, but just one or two things that you would tell yourself.
I'll tell you a secret. I hate talking about myself. I hate doing media interviews, but here I am. Look, I actually talked about this again last night. I wish I could tell myself to be confident, to believe in myself, to back my capability and my skill set. And we talked a lot actually about, and Sir Brian Roach was there, and he talked a lot about, he thinks the future of the workforce is going to move away from that hard skill, that technical skill, because we're increasingly seeing the capability of technology fill that space. And it's going to go more towards that soft skill, the empathy, the EQ, all of that. Now, that is, as a person, that's actually my skill set. That's what I'm good at. That's why I became a journalist and why I chose to become a politician. So I wish if I could go back 20 years in time, I told myself that you have your own unique capability and skill set, back it, find your passion, find your drive, and let the two worlds unite and find that career path. And I have happily have found that career path, but it's not easy. But I think, to Teresa's point, you've also got to be savvy, and you've got to do your research, and you've got to understand salary benchmarks, and where is the market rate for your skill set and your experience. How does your organizational prospective organization promote people? What actions are they looking to take? And again, sorry, Teresa, I'm copying everything you're saying because you said it so well. But find a mentor, and one of mine was there last night, and she's become increasingly important to me. But find someone who's been there before, who's, they don't necessarily have to be, the person that broke the glass ceiling, but someone who's made their own progressions and made their own achievements. But they'll help you to share how to negotiate pay. They'll offer you the career advice. They'll help you, through the slumps that you will inevitably have, because we're all human, and help build your confidence. And it's neat. I've been really lucky as MP for Selwyn that I follow a bunch of very, mighty wahine toa, in the sense of Ruth Richardson, Jenny Shipley, Amy Adams. They are powerful women politicians who have worked in a really hard world, and they've been mums and they've raised families and they've done this job. So I'm really lucky that I can lean on them. And I just encourage anyone looking, to whatever career you aspire to, and whatever you want to achieve, find someone who's been there before you, and talk to them about it.
Is this where I get to drop into the conversation that we're about to launch a mentoring program within our Future Leaders, so we can match people up, and particularly, again, looking at the applications, there's a strong cadre of women coming through. And we need to wrap up shortly, but just I want to give Nicola just a chance to finish up with a couple of points that you might, or tips you might give to employers rather than employees.
I think I've probably talked to it a little bit already, but I just think, if you are forward thinking and looking to the future of your company and your workplace, you need to be looking at the pipeline of people coming through, and what their expectations are, and what their demands are, and where their talents, where you can best use their talents. But at a practical level as well, you've got to be really clear about your own employment policies, and particularly around reviewing pay setting, whether it's implementing transparent salary frameworks, which we talked about earlier as well, and I think most importantly about investing in emerging talent and future leadership, because that will make your company sustainable in the long run.
Teresa, I need to give you the opportunity too. Is there anything you want to finish up with in our conversation?
Yeah, adding to what you've said, Nicola, I think in the end, it's employers who have the power to ensure everyone is paid fairly and that processes are communicated transparently. It's ultimately about trust and investing in our future, our youth. And, you may have read or heard the quote from Atomic Habits: you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So, yeah, audit your pay and ask, are they clear and transparent pay structures? Have I reassured staff there won't be negative consequences? Do I have pay ranges and job ads? What is in place for bias, discrimination, harassment, bullying? Do people managers understand the pay structure and initiate conversations with young people about, what their goals are, because our survey found that supportive managers can make a massive difference. And I think, if we want to address pay inequity for future generations, we need sustained commitment from all levels of society, and we need some really holistic, transformative change to job design, workplace culture, training and development, addressing unpaid labor. So I think it's all of that and a change in mindset and behaviors. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly and get equal pay for equal work. And I think this is a make it or break it situation for setting up the next generation of people to actually lead our country.
Well, I want to thank you both for your passion, but also your leadership in this space, and for such an engaging conversation as well around the topic, which is really important. I've been talking with Teresa Lee from YWCA and the Honourable Nicola Grigg, who is the Minister for Women. And that's been our first podcast in this new series, and I look forward to a couple more of these coming shortly. Thanks very much to both of you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Craig.